So what's up with Pokemon? If you're new to the game series and you haven't heard much about Pokemon and you don't really know what it's all about, maybe that's something that you would be asking yourself right now. So what is up with Pokemon? Hi YouTube, my name's Nolan and this is my weekly video games chat series that I like to call Game Chat. What I decided to do is start a little series, a sub-series within my series of game chats called So What's Up with Pokemon. This is my very first episode of that series where I would like to break it down into different generations. Pokemon is a multi-generation game series. And currently we are in the 6th generation of Pokemon games. But I want to take it back to the very first generation of Pokemon. So that's where I got started with Pokemon series, and that's where I'd like to start my series off with. And if you've never played the series before of Pokemon, Generation 1 is a very great place to get started into getting acquainted with the series, different Pokemon within the series, so on and so forth. Anyway, let's get started. I want to show you where the Pokemon series started off. Now in Japan, Pokemon first came out in version Red as well as version Green. Now why, you may ask, are there two different versions? What this is these came out for the Game Boy, the original Game Boy, black and white, monochromatic Game Boy games, and in the games you can collect Pokemon, you can trade them with other people, and you can battle them. And I'll get into the gameplay in just a few minutes, but right now I want to explain the dynamics of the game itself. Pokemon Red and Green did actually have some different Pokemon in them. There are some Pokemon which you can catch in both versions, but there are some in cases where you can only get certain Pokemon in version Red, others in version Green. And then the idea is Nintendo wanted you to be able to trade Pokemon between yourself and your friends. And that was a really great thing that they did, so that it actually boosted sales of Game Boys, even though it was towards the end of the Game Boy life cycle. So that's what Japanese got. The Japanese fans got Red and Green. However, when the series came to America, instead of Red and Green, we got Red and Blue. So if you've seen a copy of these, definitely I would say pick up a copy of Pokemon Red or Blue. They're still pretty common, pretty easy to find. However, because of the popularity of the series, Pokemon games have skyrocketed in price. Now, I wouldn't say they're out of reach, so for a copy of Red or Blue, expect to pay at least $15, $20 for a cartridge of that, if not more. Like I said, the price is skyrocketing, but if you look in used game shops, you might be able to find one for a pretty good price. Especially in shops that don't specialize in video games. If you go to a Goodwill or Stuff Etc., just any secondhand shop that doesn't necessarily specialize in games, you might be able to find a good deal. But you'd have to be pretty lucky, because if somebody else saw Pokemon Red or Blue for $5 a piece, they would probably snatch it up first. Excuse me. So if you find something for $5, definitely pick it up. Red and Blue, very similar to Red and Green in the Japanese versions. However, when they became localized for America, they changed some of the graphics, some of the Pokemon images, and they fixed a couple of glitches. Pokemon Red and Blue are notorious for an item duplication glitch. I won't get into that today, but that's just something to keep in mind. It is a lot of fun to glitch the game out in that way. Get some really strong Pokemon duplicate items. It's a lot of fun, but it does kind of take away from the gameplay value. It's up to you if you decide to do something like that if you play the game, and like I said, I won't get into that today. It's a road that if I went down, it would take a lot of time. Anyway, that's Pokemon Red and Blue, and the dynamics, the gameplay is exactly like the Japanese versions. Not a whole lot has changed. In fact, Blue is essentially a remake of Green. Like I said, the graphics, they changed some of the sprites, some of the character images, but it is in essence the same game. And no, Green, I played through Green all the way, even though it's in Japanese. That was a little bit complicated, but I knew the series well enough that I could make it through the entire game. Green does not have any hidden Easter eggs. I've heard some people online suggest that if you play through Green and collect all of the Pokemon, someone will give you a free Mew. Now Mew, I'm not going to get into this too deeply for those who don't know anything about Pokemon at all. Mew is, in essence, an uncatchable Pokemon. Mew, in the original series, Red and Blue, the creators didn't even realize that Mew was put into the game. There were some programmers who, right before the game was pushed out, they programmed this Mew character into the game. So there were some people thinking that in Green, if you play through, someone will give you a Mew. Well, that's not true. I played through the whole game, nobody gave me a free Mew, and that's the end of the story. Anyway, Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue, for the Game Boy, for the American copies. Now, as an extra treat, Pokemon Red and Blue got so big that, of course, the trading card game came out, the anime came out, and so for an extra treat, what Nintendo did is they came out with a special yellow Pikachu edition of Pokemon. Now, what the yellow version does is it changes off the starting Pokemon of the game. In Red, Blue, and Red and Green, you have the choice of which Pokemon you start off with. And you actually get a choice out of 3 different Pokemon. And whichever ones you do not get, you cannot get them later on in the game. It's impossible to get them on later on unless you trade with somebody else who has already gotten a copy of that Pokemon. So if you get 1 out of 3, you'll have to get number 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 from your friend who is willing to give it up. In Pokemon Yellow, you actually start off with a Pikachu. So instead of one of the 3 starters, you start off with a Pikachu just like in the anime. And in fact, some of the storyline has been changed a little bit to make the original Pokemon game follow the anime a little bit more closely. That's a lot of fun, and I would definitely recommend this. Pokemon Yellow version, you expect to pay a little bit more if you find a copy for it, just because it is the special edition. You do start off with a Pikachu, and it's just a little bit more sought after. Also, on the yellow version, is enhanced for the Game Boy Color, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see that. Throughout the game, the background color, it does change from town to town or area to area, but since this game is originally made for the original Game Boy, see, so Game Boy down on the side instead of Game Boy Color, the color palettes are a little bit simplified still, so don't expect a whole lot of color. Anyway, those are the major games from the first generation of Pokemon games, and what I'd like to do right now is just show you a little bit of Pokemon Blue, which I've got loaded up on my GameCube through my Game Boy player. So even though this is on a larger screen than a Game Boy, the gameplay is exactly the same as what you would see on the Game Boy. Why don't we get into it? So I have a game save existing, so I'm going to go ahead and say continue. Throughout the games, yes, you will see how do I say this? There will be these buildings throughout the towns called Pokemon Centers. In Pokemon Centers, you can go up and talk to this lady up at the counter. She will heal your Pokemon for you. It's really great. Let's say you're walking through a cave and there's lots of wild Pokemon jumping out at you. Once you get into a town, find the Pokemon Center, heal your Pokemon completely free, and if Pokemon did not have Pokemon Centers, I don't think the game would be nearly as much fun to play. Nobody would want to keep playing it if they had to constantly buy items to heal their Pokemon. Now, of course, this is a role-playing game, so there are items that you can purchase to heal your Pokemon. That's, if you've never played a role-playing game before or an RPG, that's a little bit more than I care to get into today, so I'll just explain some of the other aspects of Pokemon. So right now I'm walking through a town. Actually, what I want to do is show you a typical Pokemon battle. So I'm going to start off by walking through some grassy area. Whenever you walk through a grassy area, you should expect to encounter Pokemon eventually, just as what's happening now. So I'm initiating a Pokemon battle with this bird Pokemon named Pidgey. So it always says a wild Pidgey appears or a wild such and such Pokemon appears, and then it asks me what to do. My Pokemon shows up, it shows me the back view, along with his name, and his health meter down here. And I'm given 4 options. I can either fight, I can switch to a different Pokemon, which I've got a full complement of Pokemon in here that I can switch out during the battle. Unfortunately, if I switch out Pokemon during the battle, it will use up one of my turns. So if I switch out Pokemon, then I cannot attack during that turn, and I'm open for attack from my enemy Pokemon. The enemy that I'm fighting, in this case, a wild Pidgey. I'll back out of here. I have the option to use an item. So this would be if I wanted to use a healing item. Or, the way you catch Pokemon in this game is you use Pokeballs. Or, there are different versions of Pokeballs. There's also Great Balls, Super Balls, Ultra Balls, and the perfect, always 100% catches a Pokemon, the Master Ball. Now, there's only one Master Ball per game. So once you use that Master Ball, you're up. That's it. You can't get any more unless you restart your game. Let me take a look at the fight menu. Each Pokemon has up to 4 moves that it can use. That's always the same across the board. And this fight mechanic for the 4 moves, switching out Pokemon, using an item, these are across the board the same for all main series Pokemon games. And I say main series because there are spin-off games such as Pokemon Stadium, which is more of a fighting game than an RPG. There are some more adventure games that take away from the catching Pokemon thing, and you actually go on an adventure with one of your Pokemons. And there are some puzzle games out there as well, such as Pokemon Pinball. I can get into those in another episode. But why don't we take a closer look at this still? Anyway, we have these 4 items, or 4 attack moves that I can use. Not all moves are attacks. Some of them are defensive. Some of them boost your stats. But back on the main menu here, so we have fight, switch Pokemon, use an item, and there is the option to run. You can always run from a wild Pokemon. Or you always have the option to. If your Pokemon are weak, you may not necessarily be able to escape, and then you'll be trapped in the battle for the time being, and you can try to run on the next turn. But that's not always the case. Anyway, what I want to do right now is I'm going to fight, and I'm going to use the move Psychic, and see what it does. Sometimes a very short animation plays whenever you use a move. I think I have the animations turned off on here because this was way too quick. But anyway, as you can see, I knocked out the Pidgey, his health meter's gone, and then the Pidgey disappears off the screen. After that, I gain a little bit of experience points, and just like other role-playing games, the more experience you get, you eventually level up, and your Pokemon get stronger. One other thing I wanted to show you, and I did check this before I started this, is occasionally you run into people, non-player characters, or NPCs as they're called. You'll run into them on the screen, and they will want to initiate Pokemon battles with you. So those are cases where they're not wild Pokemon. And let me just show you what happens when you do that, when you run into an NPC. So there's this guy here. I have not fought him before. So when I run into his line of sight, he gets alerted, he walks over to me, and he greets me in a little fashion, and then immediately a battle starts. So anyway, that's the main thing behind Pokemon. So yeah, so what's with Pokemon? This is what it is. It's battling, collecting Pokemon, and let me turn down the volume on that a little bit. There is a storyline to Pokemon, so it's not just go out to see if you can catch all the Pokemon. In the story of each main Pokemon game, the idea is to go through each town, and certain towns have these Pokemon gyms. When you beat the gym leader, then the gym leader will give you a badge, and the goal of the game is to collect 8 gym badges, then go off and fight the Pokemon League. Now the Pokemon League is like the ultimate in Pokemon trainers. After you beat the Pokemon League, you have to fight the Pokemon Champion, and that makes you, the player, the brand new champion. Anyway, So what's with Pokemon? This is what's Pokemon. I hope it's been enlightening. Thanks for watching, another next week.